company culture. I've sacrificed my date night for this. So I'm definitely going to be having a drink after this talk. But yes, I'm Lizzie Benton, founder of Liberty Mind. We help improve company cultures for UK SMEs across the country. For those of you who are really into podcasting, I also have a podcast which is on season 5, Make It Thrive, the Company Culture Podcast. And that is available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasting fix. And that's where I interview a lot of companies about their cultures and what they're doing to improve their company culture. And if you want to connect with me, it'd be great to talk more about culture. Feel free to find me on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. So yes, tonight's juicy topic of embracing the new normal in company culture, because gosh, isn't it a bit different since 3 months ago? The world has very much changed. So tonight I'm going to be covering the biggest challenges our businesses have had to face since COVID-19 outbreak, how our company cultures and workplace may change after the crisis, key trends emerging out of this shift, and some of the practical things you can start doing right now to manage those culture changes. So let's be honest, what's happened since COVID-19? So I wanted to share some of the things that a lot of you can probably all relate to. So 71% of employers were struggling to adjust to remote work. Of course, this is completely understandable. Businesses are not operationally prepared to remote work. Some businesses had zero experience of a remote work operation. And let's be honest, some roles just cannot be fulfilled remotely. And of course, we've all got the fact that people are juggling work and life in a crisis situation. It's no normal working from home situation that feels really cool. We can grab a coffee whenever we like. No, we're trying to juggle work while also homeschool our children. So it's been a very overwhelming situation for a lot of us. And of course, some people simply cannot remote work effectively as well. There's a lot of talk saying, will, working from home become this new normal? Honestly, I don't think everybody can effectively work from home. We're just not used to it, and it takes an awful lot of discipline, especially not to snack every few minutes for those hobnobs. Of course, furlough as well has been a really big topic for all of us. More than 140,000 companies employing a total of about 1 million workers applied to the government's job furlough scheme on its first day. I mean, the record number that it must be at right now must be an absolutely astonishing. But in regards to our company culture, this has given us some really big issues. So people feel disconnected from the business. When you're not in the day-to-day running of the company culture, when you're not fulfilling your role, there becomes a real big disconnect between feeling part of or belonging to the business. People also have time to reflect on their roles and the company they work for. A lot of people with all of this time have had a lot of time for reflection. And sometimes this isn't always great. This means they may be thinking, well, do I want to go back into that workplace? And if it's a toxic workplace, then they're going to be considering maybe there's other options out there. And of course, maintaining communication between people and business has been a real struggle, especially during furlough. I've spoken to a lot of businesses who have said, how often can we keep people updated? How do we keep people updated? What can we do with people that are on furlough? So there's been a lot of questions around keeping communication and that sense of belonging going. And of course, without a doubt, there's been a fear of job safety. Will redundancies happen? People have been thinking, well, if I'm put on furlough, does this mean that I'm at risk of redundancy? So there's been a lot of fear and anxiety across the country, I think we can all agree. And of course, productivity. So a third of businesses have been facing difficulties with productivity. And let's be honest, I don't think any of us have been highly productive during this time. It's been a very strange situation. we have been in a crisis state, and that's what we must not forget. It's not been some jolly holiday, and while so many of us kind of sat in our bubbles at home, you know, this has been a global pandemic that we have been through, and it's something that, you know, we haven't ever seen in our lifetime. You know, a generation before us have never seen anything like this. The only thing we can compare it to at the moment is World War II. So it just gives you an idea of the brevity of the situation. And of course, businesses have been slow to adapt, especially when it comes to their operations. Not everything has been ideal to work remotely. You know, workspace is not ideal. People sitting at their kitchen tables or even on their sofa, working in their bedrooms. It's just not been the best space to be productive as well. And of course, we can't forget morale. I think, hand on heart, all of us can say that we've probably had a slight meltdown at some point during the coronavirus lockdown, because I suppose our greatest fears have kind of come to life. I mean, it has been something out of a movie. If you look out on the streets locally and it's so quiet, it's been incredibly overwhelming to experience for everybody. And you know, even if you didn't have a mental health illness before this, you've probably been affected mentally in some way, whether that's from just the general fear of change, whether it's from being anxious or overwhelmed by the situation, and the simple fact that we've been such close proximity with those we love, which sometimes isn't always a great thing for our relationships. Research from Rethink Mental Illness found that 80% of people felt their mental health was worse due to the impact of the coronavirus, with 28% indicating that it was much worse. So this just goes to show that our overall well-being has been severely impacted. And again, for company culture, this has brought up some big issues. You know, there is little support already for those with existing mental health conditions. We are starting to see this increase thanks to lots of national and localized campaigns around mental health. But, you know, the waiting times to get support is weeks or months in many circumstances. And this is just our National Health Service. Some people don't even have well-being strategies in place in their workplaces or their businesses for employees. So this has been a huge pain point for many businesses during this time of how do we help people. And of course, there's other things around our well-being as well that hasn't been ideal. People are isolated, lonely, separated, and we tend to think that loneliness is discriminatory to the elderly, but actually loneliness can even affect anybody who of any age. You know, even those who are maybe younger team members who live alone may have been affected by loneliness during this time. And we can't forget that financial worry has been a huge contributing factor to the many stresses of everybody. You know, even business owners about keeping their business going, people thinking about, you know, will they still have a job after this? The financial worry around this situation has always also been hugely heightened. So now we kind of get an idea of what we've gone through and what an absolute wild ride it's been. What is the new normal is the big question, because this has been a huge buzzword that's just been doing the rounds. And I thought I'd take a few snapshots of some of the things that I've seen recently. Reality check, nobody wants to go back to normal. And why should we? I believe that through adversity comes an advantage, and we can really learn from this experience. We can take so many lessons of how we should be moving forward, not only in our society, but also with our company cultures. Because I've spoken to so many people, and I'm sure you can all relate to this, of people that don't want to go back. I've had people say to me, do you know what, this has been a great time to reflect and pause, and I don't want to go back to the rat race. Even the amount of people I've heard say, I don't want to do the commute anymore, all of those kind of things. People want to start getting much more of that work-life balance back. And I think we're really going to see this trickling into the new normal that we start to create. So some of the data that I've found and sort of dug into, especially around going back to the new normal. So only 99% of Brits want to return to the way things were, I suppose, which is staggeringly low according to YouGov. 85% want some of the personal and social changes that have happened as a result of the pandemic to continue. So, you know, there's been a lot of social change happen during these few months that we've been in lockdown, and much of that has been incredibly positive. Even the impact on the environment. I mean, even locally, I've seen wildlife be so much more active than I ever have where I've lived locally. And 47% of people expect that working from home will continue. So let's be honest, change can be a really big trigger for people. A lot of people don't like change. It can be very overwhelming. There's uncertainty when we talk about change. But personally, I think it's highly exciting, and we can really use this time to rocket launch out of this pandemic and start to build something that's really meaningful. So yes, 100% remote and flexible working will increase because people don't want to go back to the old way of working. So expect flexible working proposals to increase, expect flexi office spaces, you know, that will rise, because why should a business have a fixed office space? They may as well just rent out a room now and again. And all sectors and industries will need to adapt. I've heard a lot of people sort of say, oh yes, but flexible working only works for this industry, or flexible working only works for this sector. 100% it just doesn't. There are so many different flexible working models out there that you can use. There are so many different businesses and industries embracing 4-day work weeks, 6-hour work days, compressed working hours. There are so many different ways you can utilize flexible working. It's about finding something that's going to be right for your business and your people. And of course, keeping culture alive for those who are going to be remote or maybe working from home for a long period of time will become a significant part of the culture strategy moving forward. So it's going to have to be part of the agenda, no matter what you think. A bit of a different one that not a lot of people know about, but virtual leadership will become a new challenge. So physically managing, leading people virtually will be a required skill, because, you know, especially for those micromanagers out there who like to be breathing down people's necks, this is going to be a shock to the system. It's going to take a lot of trust building and a lot of communication in order for people to feel like their leaders are there and supporting them and trusting them, but not micromanaging them. So the balance is going to become a real challenge for leaders who are traditionally maybe slightly on the micromanagement scale. And we can't deny it that more people will exit businesses, and this just isn't in terms of redundancies. There'll be an increase in new businesses, startups, people that want to go freelance, because if their organization, if the business they work for is not going to adapt, then this means that people are going to make the choice to go it alone. And you might be thinking, no, that's totally crazy, Lizzie. Why would you say that? Well, honestly, even in the 2008 financial recession, the growth of new businesses after that period was staggering, because yes, people got made redundant, but they used it as an opportunity to do what they love and find a balance that they needed. So don't think that this is a massively negative experience. Actually, the change is going to stimulate so much innovation and creativity. And people will look to change careers or switch companies entirely as well. If a company cannot provide that work-life balance, that support, that nurturing that people need, then they are going to start to consider where else they can go, because newsflash, people are still hiring during this time. People keep saying, oh, no one's hiring, no one's buying, it's all this negative hearsay that just isn't true. I know businesses who are hiring. I'm working with businesses who are hiring. I know people that are switching careers at this time. I know people that are starting their own businesses at this time. So essentially it's whatever you're telling yourself, but actually the story is very different. And of course, keeping people engaged and motivated will be a really big challenge, especially if you want to keep them in your company culture. And I may get called a bit of a hippie for saying this, but more meaning will enter the workplace. Like I said, we are craving that work-life balance. We are craving the ability to be able to not only be great in our careers and our roles, but also good parents. And a lot of the time, as many parents will have seen through this, it is a struggle to balance having a family and having a career. And there shouldn't have to be a choice. It should work, you know, in cohesion. But for some reason, we've been going along, you know, this kind of outdated practice in our society and trying to think that we have to sacrifice one over the other. It doesn't have to be that way. I do think deeper connections and more meaningful relationships will be built in the workplace, because whenever this is all done, I think we will really crave human to human contact. I'm a massive hugger personally, and I cannot wait to give someone a hug. I'm so excited for that moment. There's just something about that human to human contact. And yes, while we might not be able to do that in the workplace, I think we're going to want to get to know people better. And we already have done, you know, on Zoom, we're already starting to see people's lives going on in the background, their dogs, their cats, their kids doing crazy dances and other things. So we're already starting to get to know each other on a much deeper level than maybe we would have allowed ourselves in the workplace. And I do believe a culture drive will increase. So at the end of the day, I think no matter how you've reacted, people will remember how you supported them. Whenever any of us go through a traumatic life experience or an adverse event in our lives, we always remember those who supported us. We always remember the cheerleaders in our lives. If as a business you weren't that person, this is where you're going to have a lot of work to do, because culture will become a further identifier in a good employer. So, you know, an organization's culture is its behaviors at scale, basically what it says and what it does. If you've not been acting in the best way, you know, businesses behaving badly have been all over the press and been completely outed by people. They're no longer standing for this. So you really have to consider, you know, have your purpose and values, have you been living these during the crisis? Because they will have been put to test during this time, no matter how you've acted. And we mustn't forget as well that when it comes to culture, you're going to have to think differently about how you created your culture, because too many organizations have based the foundation of their culture on a physical office space, on being in a collective physical environment. But it shouldn't be. There should be so much more to your culture than just the space that your business resides in. And of course, we can't forget that well-being and safety will be a priority. So this has already been a priority as we've seen workplaces change their working spaces, and their health and safety has dramatically changed for people to be able to come back into work. So this is still going to be a huge priority for probably the next year even, okay? Giving people confidence to return to the workplace will be at the top of everybody's list right now, especially as we start to ease lockdown and start to come out of this. But the truth is, not everyone may want to come back to work straight away. In fact, according to a study by YouGov, the biggest concern for 51% of employees is how social distancing measures could be effectively implemented. And 30% are worrying about the logistics of safely moving around the workspace. So this is a really big concern for people. And not everybody is going to want to come back into the office straight away. And let's not forget, support will need to be provided for those who have been severely affected by the virus. I think for many of us who have been working from home and not affected by the virus, it's almost felt like something that's affecting someone else over there. We've lived in this very comfortable little bubble for a few months, but people have, you know, lost family members, lost friends, and we have to realize that there will be grief. And I don't think a lot of organizations have realized that yet, that there, amongst all of this health and safety concerns, there will also be a layer of grief and people overcoming how much this crisis has actually changed their lives. So before we start to kind of map out how we're going to come out of this and how we're going to change our mindset, we really have to start thinking, you know, a little bit differently, because we can't keep looking at what's always been done, because it doesn't mean it's going to work for the new place we're going in now. Some things in your business are going to no longer be fit for purpose. So it's a time to adapt and be curious and be responsive rather than reactive. We have to use a growth mindset when it comes to company culture changes. We can't just keep trying to fix it with the old model and the way things were. That is not going to serve you. It's not going to future-proof you. It's not going to make you more agile to the future changes that will come. And I just wanted to cover as well some of the other big changes we will see in the world as well, because ultimately there are things that are changing, you know, completely, economically, globally, environmentally, that are always going to impact our company culture. So I'm sure many of you have already seen that there's been a big rise in online and digital businesses. People that have never done digital business before are all of a sudden switching to a digital business. Which is great. You know, there's been yoga classes online, gym classes online, hairdressing tutorials online, whatever it is, museum tours online. Everything has gone digital over the past 3 months. And even those businesses who thought there's no way we can go digital have had to look at a digital revolution. People planning more short-term rather than long-term is also an increasing trend. And again, I think a lot of us can relate to this. Maybe we want to book that holiday we're desperately so in need of, but we're thinking, oh, actually, I'm not going to book in the next 3 months because who knows if this comes back. Or so actually, we're planning a lot more short-term. We're living a lot more in the moment, which is really changing our buying habits. It's changing what we're looking at over the next year, 5 years, when it comes to our personal goals. Things are really, really changing quite rapidly. And of course, people investing in self-knowledge. Honestly, the amount of people during lockdown I've seen take up baking, take up an instrument, put themselves on an online course. Self-knowledge has boomed during this time. And even those in the coaching and mentoring sector, I know a lot of personal coaches or business coaches, and they've actually seen a huge increase, a huge increase during this time, because people actually want to take the time to invest in themselves so that they're more resilient and can adapt to what's happened as well. And without a doubt, prevention planning will become a really big trend we'll start to see, because we'll start thinking, okay, this happened, so how can we now prevent from other big changes impacting us as well? So a few tips on how you can start to manage these culture changes. Number one from me is start auditing your working operations. So flexible and remote working is going to be a new reality. I do suggest to look at short term as well as long term, because this isn't going to just be a quick fix. One thing I really recommend, especially at the time, is ensure your culture is strong, because from a lot of the work that I've done, those with the strongest cultures have adapted incredibly well during this time. Those who haven't had very great cultures have seen the biggest drop-offs, the biggest disengagement, the biggest productivity losses. So really make sure you think about how it's going to influence your culture. Number two is don't forget to engage with your team and understand what their biggest worries and frustrations are. You know, talk to them as well as send out some anonymous surveys. Let them help you discover where you're really falling down in regards to your culture. This is always the biggest area businesses fall down on when it comes to their company culture, is they don't talk to their team enough about what are the big issues. We're still coming from a very much dictatorship of, I think this is what the issue is, without talking to anyone. So talk to people, understand what their frustrations are. And the other thing I would say is, whatever you do, don't spend hundreds of pounds on implementing some fancy survey. Honestly, there are so many free tools out there, and there are so many small packages you can implement first before you go and spend money on these, fancy pants surveys. Actually get the ground running, and if it's going to work first, rather than adopting something later on. So just think about how you can tap into how your team are feeling. Make small culture changes first. So discover your quick wins. What change or improvement could you make today that would have a really, really good impact? And I will give you an idea of how to do this a little later on. So just think about something that you could turn up the dial on and really help you to make that instant culture change. And you've got to begin to build a strategy for the new reality. Get together with your team and start making predictions and suggestions on how this may impact things, because without a doubt it's going to affect every single industry and sector. It's already affecting every business, but you have to be able to predict and look into your crystal ball and be quite playful and creative about how it might change your business, because this is where you stimulate your best ideas. This is where you begin to think about how you can adapt and become more resilient to the future, because there are going to be other changes, environmental changes, technology changes. I'm sorry if it triggers you, but this isn't the first change we're going to see in our lifetime. So you have to get used to the fact of adapting. Number 5 is be transparent with your team. People value honesty, and not acting honestly or being transparent with how you're working through this is just going to create a lot of distrust and disengagement right now, and people are going to really switch off from that, and you don't want to lose valuable people. So really make sure you're being very clear in your communication, and you're really working hard to make sure that you're showing them that, look, we have a steer on how this is going, we have a steer on what we can do to support you. Number 6 is don't copycat. I know it's really easy to do when it comes to company culture, because we look at the gimmicks of Google and all those other big brands that seem to have those quirky office spaces and do really funky things. But now is the time to behave and act under your mission and your values. If your mission and values are no longer relevant, perhaps it's time to change them. If these were invented 10 or 20 years ago, they're probably definitely going to be in need of some serious overlooking. But don't start copycatting other brands or other quirky culture trends that you've seen, because 90% of them are just fluff. They don't actually work. Even those company cultures that are based on those, ping pong tables, bean bags, pick and mix carts, whatever, it doesn't mean anything to anyone. It doesn't actually matter. None of that stuff is mattering right now, so it's not going to matter to them afterwards. You have to get into the mindset of what matters to your people and what matters when it comes to your mission and your values. And last but not least, so for those of you that know me quite well, you'll know that I follow a very simple structure when it comes to company culture, because company culture is ingrained in all of these elements of your business. And what I would do is maybe screenshot that or watch the recording and rate yourself from 0 to 10 on every single one of these elements, because this will show you where you're strongest and weakest. Okay, so your vision and values, how strong are they? How much do your team know about your values? How much are they living and breathing those values? So rate yourself from 0, so being, we really need to work on this, to 10 being, we've totally got it sorted. And then rate yourself on every single element and find out where you're weakest. What I highly recommend right now is, if you're quite high in a certain area, so let's say you're between a 6 and a 10 in one area, I would right now turn the dial up on that area. So that would be my quick win. That would be my key focus for you to work on, because dialing that up right now will probably get you a lot of happy people and start ramping up the culture movement in a much more positive way. The 0 to 5 things are your longer term culture strategies. That's where you really need to probably do a bit more work in a longer term reference. So rate yourself from 0 to 10. Use this as a bit of a guideline to start making some culture changes. It's just a really easy exercise to do to make you think about what's your weakest and what's your strongest. And that way you will have a real navigation on where you need to begin. So I really want to say that change happens. People, the world, technology. You know, this has been a pandemic, but there is so much more coming. Okay, again, not to be a massive hippie, but environmental challenges that we're going to see over the next 5 or 10 years are going to come. Global warming hasn't stopped. It's going to radically change the way we work and the way we live. Technology, artificial intelligence, that's going to change the way we work and the way we live. So we have to realize that this is an ideal time. This is an ideal foundation and a test bed to see how adaptable you can be, because it's not the last change we're ever going to see in the world. So I do have a free ebook for anybody that wants it. If you head to Liberty Mind, it's how to build the company culture you really want. There's some step-by-step tasks on how to start your company culture journey, some case studies of real life culture success stories, and a few inspiration and ideas to stimulate your company culture during this time. Like I said, it's completely free to download. So if you do feel like you want to dive into company culture a little bit more, then feel free to download it. But I will now be taking some questions. I will start with the 6 of you that responded to the SurveyMonkey link. So thank you everybody so much for providing these questions, because they are some juicy questions. So I'll get kicked off with the questions, and then I'll sort of take questions from the chat, I suppose. So the first question I have here is, I think it is the company wanting to return to exactly how it was previously. So I think basically when it comes to, you know, maybe the company going back to the way it was, the simple truth is some businesses will never invest well into their culture because they put profits over people. It's just a simple fact. Even though there is so much data and case studies now for the link between successful company culture and business performance. What I would recommend is start to build a case study for why you think change should happen. So, you know, look at data from Deloitte and Gallup, look at the amount of case studies that there are now available. So many organizations in different sectors and industries are shouting about their culture. So really look at, you know, your competition even and say, hey, look, these people are doing really well at culture. I think we're missing a massive area in our business. And essentially as well, discover what motivates your leaders and begin to influence them. You know, some leaders might be influenced by financial gain and performance metrics. Some leaders are very purpose driven. It's about identifying what motivates them and then playing to your strengths. So if you've got someone that's very data driven and financially performance related, you need to put a case to them that is very much in that way. And then vice versa, if someone's very purpose driven, you have to use positive you know, association and looking at different case studies and influence them in a positive way. So that is a great question about not wanting to return how it was. The next one was, our biggest company culture challenge is getting people back to work safely and saving jobs. I must agree, in regards to safety, this is a huge concern for many organizations. What I would say is get feedback from your team about what would make them feel comfortable and be totally transparent about what you're doing. Like I said, some people will just not want to come back to the workplace. In terms of saving jobs, I know this is very much down to financial situation. There's a knee-jerk reaction from a lot of businesses right now. And I will say a lot of businesses taking advantage of the situation. But when it comes to roles and careers and things like that, we can be very boxed in about all of that. But the fact is, now is the perfect time to look at your operations, look at the people you have, and how can you utilize that talent differently? So a great example is I've been working with a beauty brand since the start of COVID, and one of their warehouse managers, obviously she can't operate because they're not at capacity, so they've had to limit their staff, but they were like, what can we do to keep our team, because they can't they couldn't appeal for furlough. So essentially it was like, right, how can we get these people doing something differently? So the warehouse manager then has become research and innovation. So she's actually looking at different products the beauty brand can launch, other areas they could move into. And actually that person has completely, done a 180 on their job role, but it's ensured that that person can stay in the business and also that the business can move forward. So sometimes it's about thinking differently. I know we've all been in a state of fear and a state of anxiety, but I think we just too much lean towards the scarcity so much and less towards the positive and the how can we actually come out of this stronger. And the third question was, our biggest culture challenge is ensuring culture isn't diluted by more flexible working patterns and less social events. Generally speaking, a strong culture, if it's strong in the first place, won't be diluted by these things. This is an ideal time to get feedback from your team about what they would like to see the company do more of, and how this works towards your purpose and your mission. So it might be back to the drawing board in regards to what you actually want to do to keep the culture stimulated. The fourth question, our biggest company culture challenge is, after months of being mentally drained through adapting to constant change, will our mental health recover and reignite the drive and ambition of company teams? I think it will recover. I really do. I think if we put the support in and put the work in, because resilience doesn't happen overnight. We can't just bounce back overnight. It takes work. Resilience is a muscle, you have to keep poking it to make it stronger. It's not something we're just going to instantly have. So it is going to take time, without a doubt, for people to bounce back. And there's been a lot of businesses not knowing how to support or having the funds to provide the best possible support, which means there is going to need to be a strategy in some way, shape or form about how you help your team bounce back from this. Number one, absolutely right now, would be about well-being, getting people back into a good headspace to then start doing other things, because I think the mental resilience more than ever is going to be hugely tested during this time. The fifth question, we're worried about the impact of digital revolution on staff and teachers and pupils, and how we retain the community feel of the school. So the digital revolution, we have entered the digital revolution way, way long ago. But it's here to help people. I think that's what we keep forgetting about any technology. We think it's going to replace our jobs. It's going to make us all stuck to our phones and robots. But well, not right away anyway. Not compared to how Alexa doesn't ever find anything I'm asking for. In this case, honestly, it's best to look at other schools and other industries who've even adopted technology really well, because technology can make our workplaces, our organizations, our businesses much more productive and efficient, help us to work smarter rather than harder. The amount of technology that is out there now that can help us do our work so much quicker. I mean, how many of us would have been on Zoom, 4 or 5 months ago? Probably a lot less. So we have to realize that sometimes this technology can be an enabler, not a disabler. And the last question on this sheet is, our biggest challenge is psychological safety. Yeah, it's going to have to be nurtured 100% in your company culture. And like I said before, well-being is going to have to be at the top of the agenda right now. So if you haven't provided any kind of psychological safety beforehand, it's certainly not going to be there now. But this is why culture is so important, because it provides that psychological safety. I could harp on about culture all day long. And it's so exciting to see so many of you on this webinar, because, you know, this time last year when I was talking about culture, people were kind of like, oh, that's the fluffy stuff, or, oh, is that just, you know, bean bags and pick and mix? It's not. It is so much more in depth than that. It's so much more ingrained to the business strategy than just those fun perks we keep trying to put into our workplaces. So that is the 6 questions. I will now move on to the questions in the chat, if that's okay.
Yeah, so we have one through from Bev Thorogood. So what rights do organisations have when it comes to employees refusing to return to work, even if the business has put suitable safety measures in place? And I'm just wondering if that's not one that you're equipped to answer, Lizzie. We do have a few resident specialist HR guys in there as well, but do you have a view?
Yes, like you say, I don't have the legal knowledge on that. The only thing I do know is from news over the past few months, I know Whitehall are looking to make it a law that people can request working from home. But I don't know, that's all I know, is that it is being looked into.
Okay, Nikki, I don't know, putting you right on the spot, if you want to get your thinking cap on, if there's anything that you want to add in to answer Bev about what rights organisations have. I'll let you ponder on that anyway, just for a bit.
I've got a quick answer if people want it.
Oh, yeah.
Quick one. So from my understanding, and yes, things do change, my understanding is that an employee can't initially refuse if there's work available, and the business can demonstrate through their COVID secure risk assessment and the communication that there are safety measures in place. However, I always go back to, and people have apprehensions and fears, and they could be a multitude of different things, and it's not about enforcement, because then you go against all of that culture that you're trying to create, and you do more damage. So it's not about enforcement, it's about over communication, it's about reassuring them, it's about understanding their individual concerns. What are they fearful of, and try and resolve them and support them. And you know, going back to a legal stance, yes, people do have the legal right, meeting the criteria, to request flexible working. So dependent on the conversations, is there a flexible working request, and what does that situation looks like? But it's really, really important that we don't bulldoze people into returning to a business when there's probably real apprehension. Maybe there's still childcare issues, maybe there's still dependency, maybe there's individual issues that leaders have a responsibility to understand and support. And that's the stance we need to take going forward, not bulldozer, legally you have to return, because that's probably not the best way to manage it.
Great, thank you. I knew we might be able to count on you, Nikki, just to leap straight in there. Thank you very much. So there's a couple of other comments. Jonathan, I really loved your observation there when you said about having lots of conversations with your clients to warn them against telling staff their mental health is going to suffer because of the expectations that then
oh yeah, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't go into your culture and be like, oh, by the way, your mental health is going to suffer. I think that's quite clear from the data and how they're probably acting. I don't think you need to start that conversation. That should be a conversation started by them, really.
Yeah, sure. Claire Eager. Actually, Claire, rather than me just reading out your question, do you want to unmute yourself and ask it? Or I can unmute you, actually, I believe.
Oh, there you go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent, she says. So, Lizzie, fabulous, absolutely fabulous presentation and session. So thank you very much. One of the things that I've noticed is that in the reward and recognition area was one of your, not your 9 areas that you look at with culture. Yeah. I'm finding that there, this is really shifting in what's important to people.
Yes.
And I was just wondering if you have experienced it as one of the larger areas where that shift is moving.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, with any kind of reward, we seem to have been so monetary based for so long. And honestly, not everybody is motivated by money. So we need to realise that actually reward and recognition should be a much more feelings felt area. So that needs to either be related to your values, so rewarding people when they've acted or behaved on the values of the business, and recognizing as well their work, and not just recognizing again those who hit the bottom line, because in a lot of the businesses I've worked in, it'll be like, oh, sales only get recognized because they got that bumper sale in. So the customer service team don't get recognized because they're not the one nurturing that customer at all. So a lot of the time, traditionally, it's only gone to those who are, again, adding to the monetary value of the business, whereas actually we need to recognise everybody for their contribution in the organisation. And that's where they should be related to the purpose and the values. They should be a lot more individualistic, and even to the point where, you know, you've got peer-to-peer recognition as well, rather than just leader recognition, because when you get, you know, recognized by someone you're working with in the day-to-day, that has way more meaning than some manager who works in another department.
I love your passion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Claire. Great question. Just one in, hot off the press from Pete. Pete, do you want to unmute yourself and ask? Do I need to unmute you, Pete? Hang on a second. Hang on a second. It's dangerous giving me control, isn't it?
Sorry, Katie, my screen frozen. What did you say? Did you say about me asking the question?
Yeah, I thought it was
Okay,
a great
cool.
question to ask.
Yeah, cool. So Lizzie, fantastic presentation so far. Thank you very much. One of the things some of my clients are going to be looking at in the near future with potential financial challenges, and that is going to be redundancies. So what measures can they put in place to try and keep a great culture and keep high levels of engagement despite having to make redundancies?
Yeah, definitely. This is such a good one right now. And I think what's really important first and foremost is you be really transparent with people as to, you know, why those redundancies had to happen with the, you know, the remaining team, because there is going to be this sense of loss and this sense of disconnection when people go. People are going to fear for their own job safety. And what you have to start doing is building trust and really communicate as much as possible with teams. And whatever you do, I suppose it's really enforcing them to have a leadership mindset and coaching and commanding people rather than, like I say, coaching rather than commanding people. You know, that's what's going to have to really come into force now. You're going to have to nurture people a lot more to be re-engaged rather than commanding people of, like, you know, well, this has happened, keep calm and carry on, sort of like, let's just ignore the fire going on in the background kind of situation. It's like, no, you've got to face the music and you've got to be transparent with people.
Great stuff.
Yeah,
thank you very much. Some cracking questions, some great answers. I haven't seen any further questions come through, Lizzie. Oh, hang on a minute. That's a long one. Okay, so, and I don't even know whether that's G.E. Merton or somebody else, but whoever's just posted that very long question, would you like to just talk us through?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Yeah, hi. So we've been doing sort of a phased return of employees back into the office. So we're currently only at phase one at the minute. But what we found really useful is to do inductions in groups. But obviously, it's also important to obviously realise that some people who are part of this induction may be really apprehensive and quite nervous about coming back in. So what we found is for those people, those who we know that are quite apprehensive, we've been doing them on a one-to-one basis. And we find that this enables them to obviously voice any concerns. They can be discussed and obviously iron out and resolve as best as we can to enable them to, you know, to feel confident when they do come back into the office.
Great, thanks very much for your observation. That was really helpful. Listen, I just want to say thank you very much, Lizzie. You've got stacks of comments on here that people have really welcomed your your positive approach, your guidelines, your ideas, your methodology. I'm loving the fact that you've got a free ebook as well that we can grab hold of. So that's on your website, Liberty Mind?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So it's all on Liberty Mind. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. I know certainly the thing that struck me really early on was your quote about through adversity comes an advantage. And I love that. I'm going to really hang on to that. Thank you for sharing.
No worries.
And I thought there was a really nice link as well, actually, not that you know this as yet, but your point 4 about making predictions on a strategy for a new reality, it actually links brilliantly to the next HR Connect session that we've got coming up. So I just want to do a quick overview of what that's going to look like. So on the 8th of July, starting slightly early at 6 o'clock in the evening, we've got author Debbie Sunarayan, who has plenty of expertise in predicting the future. So it's nothing to do with glass balls, crystal balls, but she does an awful lot of scenario planning with businesses across the globe, actually. So I think that's going to be hugely helpful. I have said to her that, know your audience well. Many of us may not have ever done any kind of scenario planning. So she's promised us a kind of whistle-stop tour back to basics. If you want to start predicting the future, this is the kind of thing that you need to be thinking about. So if you'd like to join us, it's live on Eventbrite already. We're going to be putting all the links into the Facebook group and the LinkedIn group. It would be fabulous if you can join us. And feel free to bring something stronger than a Ribena next time if it floats your boat. But until then, I don't know if any of the other HR Connect team want to say anything, but from me, I just want to say thank you very much, Lizzie. Great session. Brilliant.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are very welcome. I hope to see you all again soon. Take care, everyone.